Hi, what I thought I should do here is show how I create one shot. So this is a short video, a few seconds long, so I may as well start playing the video. So this is the video that I'm going to be showing how to do. This is one shot. You can see he's running along the street. The camera has gone from behind the body, started from his feet, worked his way up to his, looking at his face and running straight on. And so what I thought I'd show is the various features I've used in Unity to create this shot. Now the character is actually created using a program called Vroid Studio. It's Vroid Studio, don't know how to pronounce it correctly, but it's a free software, so it's relatively easy to create these sorts of characters without a lot of artistic skill. It just gives you knobs to change the width of the eyes and the position of the eyebrows and that sort of thing. It's quite useful. But what I'm going to do is just show how I'm using Unity to create that particular video and the different features for it. So the first thing was I actually grabbed or purchased, I can't remember what this one was, but it was from the Unity Asset Store, and so it's a little bit of a downtown. I actually removed some of the bigger buildings because it's actually meant to be a small town, but I don't have the skills to actually create these sorts of locations, so I'm just using things from the Asset Store. So I've got this location, it's all set up. I've added some distance hills, you can't quite see them, oh, there's too much fog. Oh, there they are. So I've got some hills in the distance. So I've put a few things together. All my locations have got these distant mountains just to help the person know where they are. So this is in what I call a set scene, and sequences have got to, the Unity sequences are relatively new. They allow you to have a set of sequences, which is timelines. This window over here is actually the sequences window. So I've got one for episode 1. You can have at most 3 levels of nesting. I've decided to go on with episode, location, and then shot within the location. And so what I'm going to do is this downtown set scene is going to be is actually assigned to this location. We're going to have a look at that in a moment. I'm just not quite sure what the inspector is blank. But the way it actually works is, so I've got this scene, and it can be reused across multiple times because I may have different episodes I want to reuse the same location. So I've got just a scene with just a location in it. It doesn't have lighting, it doesn't have any characters, it's just the background. So then if I have a quick look in the actual project structure, what I'm going to actually do is open up a scene. What I've done for these projects is these are the packages I've tend to have bought from the store. The sequences is actually where it's storing the timelines and so forth, and you can't actually see it properly here. I should do it over in the project window. What we've got is sequences, and within sequences we've got the episode. Within the episode we've got the locations, and we've got a timeline. So all of this stuff gets created automatically. So if I come up here and right click and say, for example, create sequence, it would create a timeline, hook it all into this hierarchy for me, which saves a bit of time creating these things. And I've got a separate episode just talking about sequences. Then for each location, you can see it's created a timeline for each of my shots within it. And so it's got some useful grouping capabilities that comes along with it. You can have a lot of sequence assets. I tend not to use this. I came up with my own little assembly thing, and again, you can have a look at my separate video on that one. But what I'm going to do then is if I open up the episode 1 scene, and what it's got in this scene is I've got a prefab, and what this prefab contains is all of the things for every single episode. Whenever I create an episode scene, I've just created a prefab with all the objects I always want there. So for the top one is to do with VMC as a protocol for virtual reality characters, and what it allows you virtual motion capture. Sorry, and it allows you to send it through from a separate utility program, like something called VC Face as an example. There's a number of them, and it receives them and then uses that to control an avatar within the game, within Unity. Easy Motion Recorder then watches a character and then sees what it does and returns it into an animation clip or similar. Magico is cloth animation, which is also really good for adding to hair to make it sort of bounce a little bit more naturally. And then Skybox Crater is one I created, which is a script which allows me to pick which sky to use. And so numbers are generally easier to animate than other things, and so I've picked a hold of different sorts of skies that I wanted, kept out of the project, and then I've got this thing that I always wanted available, so I dropped it in this episode prefab. So if I update the Skybox changer, everywhere that uses this prefab will get all the changes, and that's the real reason for creating this prefab. You may have noticed over in the set scene before, there was also another prefab. At the moment it's empty, there's nothing actually on one across all of them, but it's the same concept. I put a prefab in every single set scene, and so if I add anything to the prefab, everything will get it automatically. But things like Magic Cloth, I found that I had to have it in this episode scene. If I come over to Sequences, which is out of the Sequences package, if I pick something like Location 10, here we go, I'm not quite sure it wasn't working. You've got these things called scene activation tracks, and if you click on it, it's actually it says, well, during this time load the scene, and the scene it picked was the downtown set scene. And so it's all great, but where is it? There's nothing over here called downtown set scene. Well, there's different ways you can do it. You can click the load button there, it will load it, or you can come over here and right click and just say load scenes, and it'll load all of the scenes. And so it adds it down the bottom. It's sort of there as well, but it's a little bit magical at the same time, because this is actually a separate scene. Now, as you move the cursor around, what happens is whatever the current scene that the playhead is in gets activated, and everything else gets deactivated. And so as I click around, I've picked another one, but you notice this one still had the focus, and it's because I've got to hit the playhead within this timeline here. So frequently you'll find yourself going around, you'll pick another shot. Each one of these has got a different timeline, and then you click the cursor to actually get the highlight. So we're going to actually look at the first scene, and so let's bring up the game window and just have a quick look. So this is what's happening inside Unity, and you can see it running. So I'm going to run through a little bit how I put that together. Now if I expand it, you'll see there's a whole lot of objects here, and if I click one, suddenly everything disappears. What's going on? And the answer is I've lost focus of the timeline window and playhead, and so it went and deselected everything. So very important is this little lock icon up here. You almost always want to have that lock icon on, so that when you pick something or other, it actually locks. It does change it, so it's not complete lock, but I can now click around other objects, and the actual current timeline doesn't change unless I click on a sequence timeline, and then it flips over to that one. You can see which timeline it's using in this name here. So this is the top level, mid level, bottom level of my 3-level hierarchy, and the lock, you almost always want it on, so you can click around different objects and have a look at, say, the inspector to see what the objects are like without losing focus. So that's important. Okay, so let's go a little bit further. Let's have a look at what's inside this particular shot. And I'm going to start it from the timeline. And so what we start with is a shot from the feet from behind, and then it's sort of midway up, halfway through the body from the side, and it moves around to a shot in the front. And then we're looking sort of head on. So what this is doing is, if we run from the top, we've got a character, which is Sam. Now, sequences in Unity can be done a bit different. You can actually have prefab variants with another timeline underneath, and it basically sucks that timeline in and drops it in. I'm not doing that. I'm just dropping these objects directly underneath the sequence. I just find it a bit easier because I can put all of the timelines, all the tracks for the timeline rather, down here, and I can line things up across the timeline tracks much more easily. It's personal preference, but that's what I do. So there are things like if you start seeing asset collections and sequence assembly, I'm not using them in this episode. If you're wondering where they are, they're not anywhere. I'm not using them for me. Okay, so if I come back up here, my first one is an animation track, which is for Sam. This is Sam in the scene. I'm just typing F a couple of times to get the focus and get him on the thing. I've got two tracks from him. One is a basic run. It's just out of a, I can't remember which one I got it from, but it's basically a run sequence. And then it's got a second one, which is an animation clip called Angry. And the way this animation clip, I've got a directory of different facial expressions, and this particular animation clip is hooked up to, I've got a script called Blend Shape Clip, and Angry hooks up to the strength of the Angry Blend Shape Clip within it. So, and it just sets it to 1. That's all it does. And so using that, coming back to the timeline, sorry, the idea is that the face always is, this is an angry expression, so it's not very angry, unfortunately. I might need to tweak it and make him look a little bit more angry. But we've got the first one, which is a basic run, and then we've got it's called an override track. So if you right click in the little gap there, you can add override track. This is an example of an override track. I clicked here and typed in a bit of description, and then I dropped an animation clip in from a directory of animation clips. Where did I put them? Animations, face animations. So I've created a whole lot of different sorts of face expressions already, and so I can just drop them in. I don't have to record it, I don't have to set up specially, I can just drop these animation clips in to get all standard sort of expressions. Okay, the next one is, this one is called a Cinemachine track, and what it's used for is to control the main camera. I don't know if it's just something I'm doing, but I tend to find I sometimes get problems if I just try and have a main camera without a Cinemachine one. And so I always have at least one Cinemachine virtual camera. They control the main camera and move it around. And so I've actually got a first one here, which is VCam Sam Feet. I've then got a second one, which is actually the I think it'd be the waist, and then the third one is the medium, and I'm not even quite sure it's called medium, to be completely honest, but it's the one looking at his face. And what you can do by overlapping them, because these move sideways, and by moving it sideways you get to overlap, and that causes it to blend. Because what happened without this waist shot in the middle is it would go from one behind, and then it would flip around to right to front, and would go a straight line through his body to the front, and it just looked weird. And so I needed a shot from the side to get the camera to go around his body. Now if I select the camera, it's showing me, okay, here's the camera. I'm going to move over to the side a little bit. So I'm going to wind this back. Sorry for the little thing. But you can sort of see the camera starts a bit behind, and that's why over here in the game view you can see we're sort of on a diagonal looking at the back of his feet, and the camera is just tracking him. But when you get to a certain point here, the camera starts moving upwards and beside the body. And so now we're looking at beside his hip. And because these are overlapping, it's blending between the two angles. It might not be that easy to see, but that's what's happening. It's going from a bit behind to alongside, and then immediately it keeps blending into a forward view here. And so then the camera is moving around, and that's forced the camera to move to the side of the body. So if we, how do you get all these shots lined up though? How do you position the camera? And what I often do is I will, if I want to see what a camera looks like, you can select. So we've got Sam feet, and sort of saying, well, how do I see what that looks like? Well, if you come up to the game object menu and then align view to selected, it moves the current scene view to where that camera is. And it might not be exactly the same. Let's try that again, because I just moved things around. Align to align view to selected. And so here is VCAM 1. In terms, and so that's a quick way, is through game object align view to selected, you can see what a camera is actually looking at. If I come over into the inspector here, it's got a follow of Sam, the character. It's also looking at Sam, and then there is these offsets, and so this follow offset says a little bit to the side, a little bit behind, down fairly low, because this is in meters, so it's sort of like half a meter off the ground, and so it's following the character. That's what transposer means. So it will keep following and staying the same offset from the character. And so I could change these offset around just to change the position of the camera. And so you can move them around as you see fit, but I'm purposely having it just, excuse me, a bit behind. The aim is then, what is it looking at? And so it's looking at something quite low on the body, in particular the feet. So you might notice that we're actually looking down a little bit, and here the height is actually 0.4 and it's looking at 0.2, and so it's looking down a little bit on purpose. If you then come into say the mid-size camera, which is pointing at the waist, and again I can go game object align view to selected, and you can see now I'm looking at face on. It's doing a similar thing, it's following, but the offsets are different. So now the aim is a little bit higher on the body. It's about halfway up, and there's 70 centimeters off the ground, and instead of behind, which was the z-axis, it's now 1 meter off the ground and an x of -2, so it's over to the side even more. And then we look at the, so really, oops, didn't nest them. So it's really feet, waist, and then medium, whatever, medium. Oh, it's a medium shot, so it's not a close-up. It's what they call a medium shot. That's what it was. I know what I'm doing. And suddenly for the medium shot, it's now 1.5 meters off the ground, and Z is positive, meaning it's in front of the character. And so you can see the camera here is in front, and it's looking at the character at 1.3 meters up, which is how we get it once we get around to that stage. This character's around 1.6 meters tall, so it's sort of around the face somewhere or other. And so I just fiddle with these values, the offsets, until it looks good, basically trying to get decent composition in it. So that's how it controls the camera. Frequently you don't move the camera around, in which case I still have a virtual camera, just in case I need it later on and I've had less problems. And then you have this is a real camera. So the virtual camera is really controlling where the main camera is, and the blending is then just lerping between doing linear interpretation between the two positions of the different positions of the different cameras. So it's moving around between them. Okay, next. This is actually a storyboard track that also comes with new versions, and what you can do is you can actually tell it to load up an image, and this is an image with transparency. And so it's superimposing it over the top, and that's how I get go into the game object, the title to appear over the top. And then it's there for the beginning and then disappears. So you sort of go along, and then right about here, you'll notice the image disappears, and that's just because it's telling it to load it up. This is another shot. I'm not going to bother with this one, but it's the recorder clip. Again, if you have a look in Inspector, this is episode 1, location 10, shot 10. And so the recorder clip will go from everywhere from here up to around about here and then stop. And this will be what goes into the first recording. I'm using WebM, and I just found that with Unity it records better. The other one stops and starts a bit too much. Like, let me put that another way. The MPEG one I tend to seems to just try and keep the game running full speed by degrading image quality as it writes it out, whereas WebM actually slows the game down and preserves image quality. So for my purposes, because I'm not trying to do a real-time game, WebM is generally better, and if a scene is having a bit of troubles, I'll flip it over to WebM, because MPEG's a default and I don't always remember to change it. But that's the recorder track, because it sort of says, well, okay, for a duration of 6 seconds, starting from offset 0, these are frame numbers instead of seconds, it's going to create it. Now, I'll often actually start this in a little bit from the beginning, and that'll just allows the physics to sort of settle down for any hair and bobbing and so forth. But this is a fairly simple scene. We've got, as I said, we've got Sam running along with an angry face. We've got these virtual cameras blending between them so that the camera moves around the body. Select the camera. Yeah, it's a bit hard to see. And so this is useful if your camera needs to move around. Otherwise, you're just going to have one virtual camera and one position. So the virtual cameras are really sort of like saying, here is a position I want it to be. Because it's tracking, they can move. But frequently I'll have a camera that doesn't move, so it will not have transpose, it will just be do nothing. So it's got a few different options of how virtual cameras are meant to move. Follow a dolly track, and so you can do quite complex splines and so forth using a dolly track, and so forth. Cool. What else is worth talking about in this first episode? I think that's probably it. I'll talk about more concepts in other ones. There was a little bit about the actual project structure. I have a shared directory, and if you actually go into it, shared is actually a symbolic link, and so all of the characters, all of the animation clips, all the props that need to be used between multiple locations, I put them in the shared one, and then for each project I symbolically link it in. Because what I'm doing is I'm creating a project per location rather than trying to put all the locations into a mega project, just because it got too slow. It started really slowing down a bit, and that wasn't really acceptable. Yeah, I think that's probably enough for this episode. If you found this useful, please leave a like or a comment. It just helps me. I'm not monetizing this or anything like that. I'm just sharing it in case it's useful. What it's useful to me is to find out, is there something that people are interested in? Hopefully future ones will be a little bit shorter because I won't have to go through all of the basics again. But hopefully this just shows how you can put together a scene using a combination of things. I've got animation tracks moving characters along. I've got facial expressions, controlling other properties on the object, on the character, such as the expression of the face. I've got a Cinemachine track which moves the camera around to follow the character. I've got these storyboard tracks to put overlays, such as this on the top. I actually also use this for speech bubbles. I copied the storyboard track and added the ability to write text out, and that's actually what I'm using for speech bubbles, which we'll see in a later one. And then we use recorder clips to actually create a video clip file off in another directory. And then I've got some post-processing that puts it all together. So I think that's it. This is just a first shot, and what I thought I'd do is just pick a couple of shots and explain it, and if people are finding it interesting, I will do some more. Thanks for watching.